The lunch bell rang, echoing through the long hallways of Riverside Elementary School, where colorful posters lined the walls and laughter bounced off every corner. Children rushed toward the cafeteria, their sneakers squeaking against the polished floor, their voices rising in excited chatter. But in the far back of the cafeteria, away from the laughter and the noise, sat a little girl, Maya Carter, 8 years old, small for her age, with two neatly tied braids and eyes that always seemed to hold too many secrets for someone so young. Her clothes were clean but worn, her shoes slightly scuffed, and her smile, the one she used to wear so often, had grown faint, almost forgotten. She placed her faded pink lunchbox on the table, tracing the small heart sticker her mother had placed there years ago. She opened it slowly, as if hoping that maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different. Inside lay a simple sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, an apple and a homemade cookie her mum had baked before rushing to her second job. It wasn't fancy, but it was made with love. Maya whispered softly to herself, "Mom said this cookie's special today." She smiled faintly, remembering how her mother had hugged her that morning. "You're brave, baby girl," her mom had said, "and don't let anyone make you feel small." But bravery is hard when you're alone. Just as she took her first bite, a group of 3 kids walked by. Lily, Chase, and Ben, the same ones who never missed a chance to remind Maya that she was different. Lily wrinkled her nose. "Ooh, what is that? You eat that every day?" Maya looked down. "That's just peanut butter and jelly," she said softly. Chase snickered. "Looks cheap. My mom says only poor kids eat that kind of stuff." Ben added, "Yeah, we get real food, pizza, nuggets, fries. Not that trash." Maya tried to stay quiet, tried to pretend it didn't hurt, but her hands shook slightly as she held her sandwich. Her throat tightened, her heartbeat thumping like a drum in her chest. Then, before she could react, Lily reached out and grabbed the lunchbox. "Hey!" Maya cried, standing up. "Give it back." But they laughed, that cruel, sharp laughter that cuts through a child's heart like glass. In one swift motion, Chase opened the trash bin beside their table and dumped her sandwich, her apple, and her cookie inside. The sound of the lunchbox hitting the metal bin echoed louder than any laughter in the room. For a moment, everything froze. The smell of food and the buzz of conversation faded. All Maya could hear was the crinkle of the trash bag as her lunch disappeared inside. Her lips trembled. Her small fingers clutched the edge of the table. Tears welled up in her big brown eyes, blurring everything around her. She whispered, barely audible, "They threw my lunch away." Again. The bullies just shrugged and walked off, still laughing as if nothing had happened. Around them, dozens of kids saw us, but none said a word. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others just pretended not to notice, because standing up for someone was harder than staying silent. Maya sank back into her chair, her empty lunchbox still open in front of her. She stared at it as if staring could somehow make the food reappear. Her stomach growled quietly, but the hunger in her heart hurt more than the one in her belly. Minutes passed. The noise of the cafeteria slowly returned. Trays clattered, children joked, teachers chatted near the door. Life went on, as if her pain didn't matter. Maya picked up her spoon and tapped it softly on the table, trying to distract herself, trying not to cry too loudly. But when she looked around and saw everyone eating happily, something inside her broke. Her vision blurred as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She pressed her small hands to her face, whispering, "Why me? What did I do wrong?" No one answered. The fluorescent lights flickered above her, the sound of laughter echoing in her ears like cruel reminders that she didn't belong. Her heart felt heavy, her body small and fragile. She missed her mother, the only person who ever told her she was enough. And then, across the cafeteria, a shadow paused in the doorway. A tall man in a black suit surrounded by school staff looked in her direction. His eyes narrowed slightly as he noticed the small girl sitting alone, her lunchbox empty, her face buried in her hands. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know her story, but something about the sight of her, so small, so broken, so invisible in a world full of noise, made him stop walking. That man was Jonathan Hayes, one of the most powerful and wealthy men in the city, a billionaire who thought he'd seen everything. But in that single heart-wrenching moment, as he watched a little black girl cry alone over a lost lunch, something inside him shifted. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, that small, quiet act of cruelty, would change both of their lives forever. Because sometimes, the greatest stories don't begin with heroes or grand gestures. They begin with tears, and a stranger who decides to listen. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Riverside Elementary, spilling golden light onto the polished floors. The school was buzzing with excitement. Word had spread that a billionaire was visiting today. Teachers hurried through hallways, fixing bulletin boards and adjusting decorations. Students whispered about limousines, business suits, and fancy speeches. That billionaire was Mr. Jonathan Hayes, a man whose name appeared in newspapers, magazines, and television screens. Known for his empire in technology and finance, he was celebrated as one of the most successful men in the country. But despite all his wealth, Jonathan carried something within him, a quiet ache, a loneliness that money could never cure. He had once walked these same hallways as a small boy. He remembered how the lockers smelled of pencil shavings and old paint. He remembered sneaking into the library to read books when he couldn't afford his own. He also remembered how it felt when classmates mocked him for wearing the same faded shirt week after week. Today, he had returned to donate a new library, to give back to the place that had once made him feel invisible. As he walked beside Principal Andrews, the man spoke with practiced enthusiasm. "Mr. Hayes, we're honored to have you here. The students are thrilled. We've prepared a small ceremony after lunch." Jonathan smiled politely. "That sounds wonderful, Principal. It's good to be back." But his eyes drifted to the walls, to the rooms filled with children's laughter, to the sound of trays clattering in the cafeteria. Then, faintly beneath the cheerful noise, he heard something else. A soft, broken sound. A child crying. He stopped mid-step. His brow furrowed. "Wait," he said. The principal turned, confused. "Something wrong, sir." "Did you hear that?" Jonathan asked quietly. The principal listened for a moment, then sighed. "Oh, that? Probably just a student upset about something trivial. Kids can be sensitive. Let's keep moving." But Jonathan didn't move. His instincts wouldn't let him. That sound, and so faint yet filled with pain, tugged at something deep in his chest. It reminded him of the days he cried alone in the bathroom because his classmates called him the poor kid. He took a step toward the cafeteria. "I want to see," he said. The principal hesitated. "Mr. Hayes, perhaps—" "I said," Jonathan's voice softened, but his tone carried quiet authority. "I want to see." The principal sighed and followed him. The two entered the cafeteria, where the hum of lunchtime filled the air. Children were laughing, sharing snacks, swapping sandwiches, a picture of joy. But Jonathan's eyes moved past the noise, scanning every corner until they stopped at the far end of the room. There she was. A small girl, sitting alone by the wall, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling. An empty pink lunchbox lay open in front of her. Around her, kids walked by without looking, pretending she wasn't there. Jonathan's chest tightened. He walked slowly toward her, his expensive shoes clicking softly against the tile floor. As he got closer, he saw the tears glistening on her cheeks. She looked so tiny, so fragile, like the world had already been too cruel to her. He knelt beside her, lowering himself to her eye level. His voice was gentle. "Hey there," he said softly. "What's wrong?" Startled, Maya quickly wiped her face, embarrassed. "Nothing, sir," she stammered. Jonathan tilted his head. "Doesn't look like nothing." Her voice cracked. They threw my lunch in the trash again." The words hit him like a punch. "They what?" he asked quietly. "They said it looked gross," she whispered, her small hands trembling. "They always do it. They say I don't belong." Jonathan's eyes darkened, not with anger but with deep, painful recognition. He remembered the feeling, the sting of being unwanted, the humiliation of being seen as less than others. He gently closed her lunchbox and said, "You don't deserve that." "No one does." Maya looked up at him, confused. "Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "Just someone who knows what it feels like to have their lunch thrown away." Her eyes widened. "They did that to you too?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, many times." The cafeteria buzzed around them, but in that small corner time seemed to stop. For the first time in a long while, Maya felt seen, truly seen. And for the first time in years, Jonathan felt something he hadn't felt in his glittering, isolated life, purpose. He looked over his shoulder and saw the bullies at another table, laughing with their friends. He could have called them out, demanded punishment, used his power to shame them. But instead, he turned back to Maya and smiled gently. "Tell me," he said, "what's your favorite food?" She sniffled. "Mac and cheese," he chuckled softly. "Mine too." She gave a small, shy smile, and Jonathan realized how beautiful her courage was, to keep coming to school, to keep smiling even when life felt so unfair. In that instant, he knew this wasn't just a visit anymore. This was a moment that fate had written long before, a meeting between a man who had everything and a child who had almost nothing, yet possessed something far greater: heart. As he stood to leave, he looked back one more time. Maya sat up a little straighter, as if his presence had lifted a weight off her tiny shoulders. And deep inside, Jonathan Hayes, billionaire, businessman, and man of the world, and whispered to himself, "She won't cry alone again. Not while I'm here." Jonathan Hayes sat on the edge of the small cafeteria bench beside Maya, the faint hum of voices and clatter of trays fading into the background. For a moment, all he could see was the fragile little girl in front of him, trying so hard not to cry. She had wiped her tears, but her eyes were still red, and her tiny hands fidgeted nervously in her lap. She glanced at him with a mix of confusion and fear, unsure why a man in a tailored black suit, someone she had seen on TV that morning, was talking to her at all. Jonathan's gaze softened. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to sit right here, this very cafeteria." Maya blinked. "You did?" He nodded. "A long time ago, back when I was about your age. I didn't have much, just a worn-out backpack and the same peanut butter sandwich every day." Her eyes widened slightly. "Like me?" He smiled faintly. "Exactly like you." He looked down for a moment, his fingers tracing the edge of the table, as though trying to touch the memories buried beneath its surface. "I remember, one day," he continued, his voice distant but steady, "a group of boys grabbed my lunch and threw it out that door." He pointed toward the cafeteria exit. "They laughed while I picked it up off the floor." Maya's eyes glistened with quiet sympathy. "That's mean." He nodded. "It was. But what hurt most wasn't losing my lunch. It was that no one stood up for me. Not one person." The words hung heavy in the air. Around them, laughter echoed, a cruel contrast to the silence of their small world at that table. Jonathan leaned back slightly, taking a slow breath. "You see, Maya, sometimes people are cruel because they don't understand others. They see something different and they fear it. Your courage, your kindness, it makes them uncomfortable because deep down, they wish they could be like you." She tilted her head. "Like me? But I'm not special." He smiled gently. "Oh, you are. You have something they don't. Strength that comes from kindness, the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself by hurting someone else." Maya looked down, tracing circles on the table with her finger. "It's just hard. Every day they laugh. Sometimes I want to stay home. Mom says I have to keep going, that brave girls don't give up." Jonathan's expression softened even more. "Your mom sounds wise." "She works a lot," Maya whispered. "2 jobs. She says we don't have much, but we've got love. She always packs my lunch even when she's tired." Jonathan's heart clenched. He could almost see her mother, exhausted, standing in a tiny kitchen late at night, spreading peanut butter on bread, smiling through her weariness because she knew that sandwich carried more than food. It carried love, hope, and dignity. He looked back at Maya. "She must be proud of you." Maya shook her head slightly. "I don't think she knows I cry here." "Maybe you should tell her," he said softly. "I don't want to make her sad," she replied. That answer pierced him deeper than he expected, because that's what he had done too, hid his pain so the people who loved him wouldn't worry. Jonathan's mind drifted to the days when he'd come home to a single mother who worked 3 jobs, to the nights when she'd tell him, "You're going to make it, Johnny, you just have to believe." He smiled faintly at the memory. His mother was gone now, but her words lived on, echoing in moments like this. And now, sitting beside Maya, he saw his younger self again, lost, hungry, but still holding on to hope. "Maya," he said after a pause, "can I tell you a secret?" She nodded. He leaned closer and whispered, "The people who laugh at you now, one day they'll look up to you, because kindness always wins in the end." Her eyes searched, his face trying to believe the words, trying to imagine a world where she wasn't the target of laughter. He reached into his pocket and took out a small gold pen, the one his mother had given him when he graduated college. He placed it on the table. "This pen helped me write my dreams down," he said, "and every dream I wrote came true. You should start writing yours too." Maya picked up the pen, staring at it like it was a treasure. "Can I really?" He smiled. "You can do anything you want. You just have to keep believing, even when no one else does." The bell rang suddenly, signaling the end of lunch. Maya jumped slightly. She picked up her empty lunchbox and held the pen close to her chest. Jonathan stood as she did. "Hey," he said softly, "don't let today break you. Let it build you." She smiled, small, shy, but real. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," he said. "Jonathan Hayes." Her eyes widened. "The man from the news?" He laughed quietly. "The same one." Her mouth fell open in surprise, but before she could say anything more, her teacher called her name from across the cafeteria. She turned to leave, then looked back and said, "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." He watched her walk away, that little girl with the empty lunchbox and the heart full of quiet courage. And as he stood there, a single thought echoed in his mind. Maybe I didn't come here just to build a library. Maybe I came here to remember who I used to be. The next morning arrived cold and grey, the kind of morning where the sky looked heavy with secrets. The children at Riverside Elementary ran through the front gates, backpacks bouncing, unaware that something extraordinary was about to happen. Maya walked slowly, clutching her lunchbox close to her chest. Her mother had smiled at her before work and said, "Today's a new day, baby girl. Keep your head high." But Maya knew new days often felt the same. She could already hear the laughter waiting for her in the cafeteria, the whispers about her food, the stares that made her feel small. Still, she walked in. Her braids swayed gently as she made her way down the hall. The smell of pizza and fries filled the air, everyone's favorite lunch except hers. She sat in her usual corner, opened her lunchbox quietly and whispered a small prayer before taking a bite. And then, just as she lifted her sandwich, a sudden hush spread across the cafeteria. Conversation stopped. Forks froze mid-air. Heads turned toward the doors. A tall figure had just entered, dressed in a crisp suit, polished shoes gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Behind him stood two assistants holding silver lunch containers. Teachers exchanged stunned glances. The principal followed nervously, clutching a clipboard. It was Jonathan Hayes. Whispers rippled through the cafeteria like wind across water. "That's him. The billionaire. What's he doing here?" Jonathan didn't glance around for attention. His gaze was steady, searching, until it landed on Maya. She sat there, wide-eyed, her small hands frozen on her lunchbox. He walked straight toward her table. Every step he took echoed across the tiled floor. The room was silent except for the clicking of his shoes. When he finally stopped, he set down a polished silver lunchbox right in front of her. "Maya," he said softly, smiling, "would you share lunch with me?" The words hung in the air like a miracle. Maya blinked, unsure if she had heard right. "With you?" she stammered. He nodded. "Yes, with me." The cafeteria erupted into murmurs. The bullies at the next table exchanged confused looks. Lily, Chase, and Ben froze where they sat, their smirks gone. Jonathan opened the silver box. Inside was a neatly packed meal, mac and cheese, a fruit cup, and a warm chocolate chip cookie. The smell filled the room, familiar and comforting. He slid half of it toward Maya. "Your favorite, right?" he said, his eyes kind. Maya's mouth fell open. "How did you know?" He chuckled quietly. "I listened." She hesitated, then picked up her fork. Together they began to eat, the billionaire and the little girl, side by side in silence, while hundreds of students stared in disbelief. After a few minutes, Jonathan wiped his hands with a napkin and looked up. His voice, calm but firm, carried across the cafeteria. "You see this young lady here?" he said, gesturing toward Maya. "She has more courage than most adults I've met. She comes here every day, holds her head high, even when the world tries to make her feel small." The room was completely still. No one dared to move. He continued, "I used to be just like her, poor, quiet, invisible. People laughed at my lunch too. But what they didn't know was that kindness and hard work can turn any story around." His eyes scanned the room, landing for a moment on the group of bullies. "What makes you powerful isn't money or clothes or popularity. It's how you treat people when no one's watching." Maya sat frozen, her heart pounding. She wanted to cry, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of something new. Pride, hope. Jonathan smiled and added, "And for the record, this girl has more class in her heart than some of the richest people I know." The room erupted, not in laughter, but in applause. Even the teachers clapped. Some students who had stayed silent before now looked at Maya with admiration. The bullies lowered their heads, embarrassed, unable to meet her eyes. Maya looked up at Jonathan and whispered, "Thank you." He smiled warmly. "No, Maya, thank you. You reminded me why I came back here." When lunch ended, Jonathan stood, straightened his jacket, and gave her a wink before leaving. The crowd parted silently as he walked through. But the silence wasn't out of fear this time. It was out of respect. As he stepped into the hallway, Jonathan glanced back through the glass doors. Maya was smiling, surrounded by classmates who had once ignored her. For the first time, she wasn't sitting alone. The principal caught up to him, still in shock. "Mr. Hayes, that was unexpected." Jonathan gave a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes the lesson a school needs most isn't in a book, Principal. It's in a lunchbox." Outside, his black car waited. As he climbed in, he glanced once more at the school through the window. In his mind, he could still see the little girl's shy smile, the same smile that had awakened something in him he thought he'd lost long ago. That day, one act of kindness stopped an entire school in its tracks. And though Maya didn't know it yet, the world had just begun to change, starting with a single shared lunch. That evening, the sky turned golden-orange as the sun began to set behind the city skyline. But Jonathan Hayes couldn't stop thinking about the little girl from the cafeteria, about Maya, the child with brave eyes and a trembling smile. He sat in his office, high above the city, surrounded by glass walls and quiet. Below, cars moved like rivers of light. His desk was clean, his phone buzzing with constant notifications from assistants and board members. But none of that mattered. His thoughts were still in that school cafeteria. He saw her small hands clutching her empty lunchbox. He heard her quiet voice say, "They threw my lunch in the trash again." Those words echoed in his mind like a haunting melody. Jonathan leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. What kind of world lets a child feel invisible? He pressed the intercom button. "Sarah," he said to his assistant, "find out where that little girl lives. The one from Riverside Elementary." "Maya Carter." Sarah hesitated for a moment. She had learned not to question Jonathan's instincts. "Right away, sir." By the next afternoon, he had an address. It wasn't far. A small apartment complex on the east side of town near the bus depot. Without waiting for a chauffeur, Jonathan grabbed his coat, got into his own car, and drove himself. The neighborhood was quiet but tired. Cracked sidewalks, peeling paint, and rusted mailboxes told stories of struggle. Children played outside with makeshift toys, their laughter echoing through narrow alleys. Jonathan parked his car by the curb and looked up at the building. Apartment 3B, that was hers. He climbed the creaky stairs and knocked gently. After a moment, the door opened and a woman appeared. Mid-30s, tired eyes, but a warm face. She wore a simple work uniform with her name stitched on the pocket, Angela Carter. "Yes?" she asked politely, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you?" Jonathan smiled softly. "Mrs. Carter." "My name's Jonathan Hayes. I met your daughter at school." Her eyes widened in shock. "Mr. Hayes?" "The Jonathan Hayes," he nodded. "I just wanted to stop by and—" "Thank you." Angela blinked, confused. "Thank me? For what?" "For raising one of the bravest girls I've ever met." Angela froze for a second. Her eyes softened, and she motioned for him to come inside. The apartment was small but cozy. A little living room with second-hand furniture, a shelf full of children's books and drawings taped to the wall. Maya's laughter drifted from the next room. "Mama, who's at the door?" Angela smiled. "Just a guest, baby. Come say hello." Maya appeared, still in her school clothes, holding a crayon-stained notebook. When she saw Jonathan, her eyes lit up. "Mr. Hayes!" she said, running to him. He chuckled. "Hey, Maya, you doing okay?" She nodded proudly. "Everyone was nice to me today." Nobody laughed. Jonathan smiled warmly. "I'm glad to hear that." Angela looked between them, clearly curious. "She told me about what you did. Having lunch with her. You made quite an impression." Jonathan's expression softened. "Your daughter reminded me of something I'd forgotten, what courage looks like when the world isn't kind." Angela's eyes filled with tears. She's had a hard time fitting in. Kids can be cruel. But I keep telling her that kindness always wins. He nodded slowly. "She told me that you work 2 jobs. Angela gave a small embarrassed smile. "Yeah, I'm a cleaner in the mornings and a cashier at night. It's not easy, but it keeps food on the table. Maya deserves that much." Jonathan looked around the small apartment. It was modest but filled with warmth. Family photos lined the walls. A small dinner table held 2 plates and a single candle in the middle. The scent of home-cooked soup filled the air. He said softly, "You've built something beautiful here, Angela." She shrugged. "Maybe, but sometimes I wish I could give her more. Kids at school have fancy things. Maya never complains, but I know she notices." Jonathan's chest tightened. He understood that feeling all too well. The quiet ache of wanting to give your child the world but only having enough for today. Angela smiled through her tears. "Still, she's my sunshine. She always says, 'Mom, we might not have much, but we've got love.'" Jonathan's throat tightened. "That's what makes her special. You've given her the kind of wealth money can't buy." Angela chuckled softly. "I just want her to believe she's enough. That she's worthy, no matter what anyone says." Jonathan nodded, emotion thick in his voice. "She will. I'll make sure of it." Angela looked at him curiously. "You will?" He paused for a moment, then smiled. "Yes, because kids like her, they deserve more than survival. They deserve to be seen, to be valued." Angela wiped her eyes. "You sound like someone who understands struggle." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I do." For a few minutes they sat together, a billionaire and a mother who worked herself to exhaustion, united by the same simple truth: love. As he stood to leave, Maya tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly, "when I grow up I want to help people too, like you helped me." He knelt and placed a hand on her shoulder. "So you already are, Maya. You just don't know it yet." As he walked out into the evening air, the city lights flickered to life around him. He took one last look back at the apartment. Small, humble, but filled with something his mansion never had: heart. And in that moment, Jonathan Hayes made a silent promise, one that would soon change everything. That night, Jonathan Hayes couldn't sleep. The image of Maya's bright eyes and Angela's tired but proud smile lingered in his mind like a melody that refused to fade. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, a place filled with everything money could buy, yet suddenly it felt empty. The silence around him was loud. The art on his walls, the expensive furniture, the city skyline, none of it brought comfort. All he could think about was a little girl whose lunch had been thrown away, and a mother who worked 2 jobs just to make sure her daughter never went hungry again. For years, Jonathan had lived by one rule: don't get attached. It was how he survived the ruthless world of business: keep emotions out of everything. But Maya had shattered that rule without even trying. He got up, walked to the window and looked out over the city. The lights twinkled like stars trapped on the ground. He whispered to himself, "It's time to do something real." The next morning, Jonathan arrived at his office early. His assistant, Sarah, barely had time to greet him before he began giving rapid instructions. "Sarah," he said firmly, "call the board. I want an emergency meeting at noon. We're changing our community investment plan." Sarah blinked. "Sir, the plan was already finalized for this quarter." "I don't care," Jonathan replied, his voice sharp but purposeful. "We're changing it." By noon, the top executives of Hayes Enterprises sat around the massive conference table. They looked confused as Jonathan walked in, holding a small notebook. He didn't start with numbers or slides. Instead, he began with a story. Yesterday, he said, I met a little girl named Maya Carter. She's 8 years old. Every day she brings her lunch to school, and some kids throw it away because it's not fancy enough. Her mother works 2 jobs to feed her. Yet that girl smiles as she believes kindness always wins. The room fell silent. No one dared interrupt him. Jonathan looked around the table. We've spent millions on marketing, on brand image, on things that make us look good. But tell me, when was the last time we did something good? A few executives shifted uncomfortably. Jonathan continued, his voice soft but steady. I realize something. It's not about the money we make. It's about the lives we touch. From this day forward, Hayes Enterprises will fund a program for underprivileged children in every school district we operate in. Free meals, supplies, mentorship, everything they need to believe in themselves. He paused, his eyes glistening with emotion. Because no child should ever cry over a lunch. The room was still. Then slowly, one of the executives clapped. Another followed. Soon the entire table was applauding, not out of obligation but out of genuine respect. Sarah stood at the back, smiling proudly. She had never seen Jonathan like this before. Not the billionaire everyone feared, but the man he could have been all along. After the meeting, Jonathan sat alone in his office, staring at the city again. But this time he didn't feel empty. He felt alive. Later that afternoon he made another stop, this time back at Riverside Elementary. The principal, Mrs. Foster, was surprised to see him. Mr. Hayes, what an unexpected visit. Jonathan smiled warmly. I wanted to talk about a small idea, something that might help your students. An hour later, the school cafeteria buzzed with excitement. Workers began unloading boxes, fresh fruit, warm meals, colorful lunch trays, and small notes attached to each one that said, You are special. You are loved. Maya walked in, eyes wide in disbelief. Mr. Hayes? She whispered. Did you do all this? Jonathan knelt beside her and smiled. We did this together. You inspired it. Tears filled her eyes as she hugged him tightly. Around them, children cheered, laughing and eating joyfully. The cafeteria, once filled with whispers and judgment, was now bursting with kindness. As cameras flashed and reporters gathered, one journalist asked, Mr. Hayes, what made you start this initiative? Jonathan looked at Maya and smiled softly. The little girl reminded me that even the smallest act of kindness can change the world. The journalist pressed, And what do you call this program? Jonathan thought for a moment. Then he said, The Maya Project. For every child who's ever felt unseen. Applause erupted. Maya blushed, hiding her face in Jonathan's coat. That night the story went viral. Social media flooded with the headline, Billionaire launches Maya Project after little girl's lunch was thrown away. Millions of people shared the video, not because of the billionaire's wealth, but because of his heart. And somewhere in a small apartment across town, Angela Carter sat watching the news with tears streaming down her face. She pulled Maya close and whispered, See, baby? Kindness really does win. Outside, the world went on as usual, but for Jonathan, everything had changed. He finally understood that success wasn't measured by numbers in a bank account, but by the lives that smiled because of you. Overnight, the Maya Project became more than just a headline. It became a movement. News channels played the same clip again and again. Jonathan Hayes, the billionaire known for his cold business empire, kneeling beside a small black girl with a radiant smile. The image of Maya hugging him tightly, surrounded by cheering classmates, flooded the internet. People around the world shared her story. Celebrities tweeted it. Schools from other cities called to ask how they could join. Parents wrote letters saying, My child cried watching this video. Thank you for reminding us what compassion looks like. But the biggest change wasn't happening in boardrooms or social media. It was happening inside Jonathan's heart. For years, he had lived behind walls of glass and money. Now, for the first time, he felt those walls cracking open. He spent his mornings visiting schools, shaking hands with teachers, talking to children, and handing out new lunches with Maya by his side. She became the face of the movement, her laughter contagious, her innocence a symbol of hope. Maya, Jonathan said one morning as they stood in front of a new school kitchen, do you know what you've started? She giggled. "No, Mr. Hayes, what did I do?" He smiled. "You reminded us to care." She looked up at him with shining eyes. "Mama says caring doesn't cost anything." Jonathan's heart ached at how simple yet powerful her words were. At the same time, life was changing for Angela too. The once tired mother now stood proudly beside her daughter at community events, speaking to crowds about love and resilience. She had quit one of her jobs. Jonathan had quietly ensured she wouldn't need to work herself to exhaustion anymore. But Angela never asked for money. All she ever wanted was dignity. In one television interview, when asked what she thought of Jonathan Hayes, she said softly, "He didn't just feed my child. He listened to her. That's something money can't buy." The internet exploded with love for her honesty. People began donating, volunteering, and opening food programs in their own towns, all inspired by one little girl's tears and courage. But behind the applause, Jonathan carried something deeper. He rarely spoke about it, but years ago he too had been a hungry child. Before the suits, before the wealth, he had grown up in a broken home. His mother working double shifts. His lunch often skipped so he could pretend he wasn't hungry. One memory haunted him most. The day a teacher threw away his stale sandwich and said, "You should ask your parents to pack something decent next time." He had never forgotten the humiliation, the anger, the shame. He had buried it deep, using ambition as armor. But seeing Maya's pain had brought it all rushing back, and healing it in ways he never thought possible. Now, every time he looked at her, he saw that lost boy inside himself, finally being told, "You're enough." One evening, after a long day at a school event, Jonathan dropped Maya and Angela home. As Maya ran inside to show her mother a drawing she made for the Maya project, Angela lingered at the door. She turned to Jonathan and said softly, "You've done something beautiful, Mr. Hayes, not just for us, but for yourself too." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I needed her more than she needed me." Angela's eyes softened. "Sometimes the universe brings the right souls together for healing." Jonathan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "She reminds me that even the smallest voices can make the biggest echoes." That night he drove through the city, the lights blurring through his windshield. He thought about his mother, about every meal they'd skipped, about how she used to say, "One day, Jonathan, help someone the way you wish someone had helped us." He whispered into the night, "I kept my promise, Mom." Days turned into weeks. The Maya project expanded across the state. Thousands of children receiving free lunches, mentorship and support. Reporters called Jonathan the billionaire with a heart. But he didn't care for titles anymore. For him, the reward was seeing Maya laugh every time she handed another child a meal. One afternoon, during a school assembly, Maya was invited to speak. The small gymnasium was packed. Students, teachers, parents, cameras. Jonathan sat in the front row, proud and emotional. Maya stepped up to the microphone, her voice small but steady. "My name is Maya Carter," she began, "and once my lunch was thrown away. I cried that day because I thought maybe I didn't belong. But then someone showed me that kindness can change everything." The room went silent. Even the cameras stopped clicking. She continued, "Mr. Hayes told me that even when the world isn't kind, we should still be, because kindness is stronger than hate." Tears streamed down Jonathan's face. The audience stood, clapping thunderously. That moment, the sight of a little girl standing tall, proud, and brave was worth more than all the riches in the world. And as Maya smiled at him from the stage, Jonathan realized something profound. He hadn't just changed her life, she had changed his. Months passed, and the world was still talking about the Maya project. What started as a small act of compassion in one school cafeteria had grown into a nationwide movement. From city to city, children who once felt forgotten now had hot meals waiting for them every day. Schools began adopting the slogan "Kindness always wins," painted in bright letters above lunchroom doors. And at the heart of it all was an 8-year-old girl with a bright smile and hopeful eyes, Maya Carter. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. Some called her the little girl who changed a billionaire. Others called her the girl who changed the world. But Maya didn't care about the attention. To her, it wasn't about fame. It was about kindness. "Mr. Hayes always says kindness is a chain," she told a reporter once. "When one person starts it, it keeps going forever." Jonathan Hayes watched her from behind the scenes, his heart full. He had attended countless board meetings, closed deals worth billions, and built an empire, yet nothing had ever made him feel as proud as watching Maya speak about love and hope. One chilly autumn afternoon, he was invited to a special event at Riverside Elementary, the school where it all began. When he arrived, he noticed something new. The cafeteria walls were freshly painted, and at the entrance stood a bronze plaque. It read, "The Maya Project Cafeteria, where kindness began, dedicated to Maya Carter and all the children who remind us that love can change the world." Jonathan's throat tightened. As he stepped inside, he saw Maya and Angela waiting for him, smiling. "Mr. Hayes," Maya shouted, running toward him with open arms. He caught her in a hug, laughing. "You look taller every time I see you," he teased. Angela chuckled. "She's growing fast, faster than I can keep up." They walked together to the stage at the front of the cafeteria. Dozens of children were seated, holding colorful drawings that said, "Thank you, Mr. Hayes, and thank you, Maya." The principal handed Jonathan the microphone. "Mr. Hayes," she said warmly, "because of you and Maya, no child in this school, and or in hundreds of others, ever goes hungry. We can't thank you enough." Jonathan looked around the room, his voice thick with emotion. "You shouldn't thank me," he said softly. "You should thank the little girl who taught me what real courage looks like." He looked at Maya. "You changed my heart, Maya, and through that, you changed the world." The room erupted in applause. Maya's cheeks flushed, and she hid her face against her mother's shoulder. Later that evening, after the ceremony, Jonathan asked Angela and Maya to walk with him outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. "Maya," he said gently, "do you remember the first day we met?" She nodded. "I was crying because they threw away my lunch." He smiled. "Yes, and now look at you. You've fed thousands of children." She grinned proudly. "I told you, kindness always wins." Jonathan laughed softly. "So you were right, Maya, you always were." Angela placed a hand on his arm. "Jonathan," she said kindly, "you've done so much for us, but I think you've also found something you were missing." He looked at her, his eyes softening. "You're right. I found my purpose." They stood there quietly for a moment, the wind rustling through the trees, children laughing in the distance. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt complete, not because of money or success, but because of connection. A few months later, the Maya Project expanded internationally. Schools across Africa, Asia and Latin America adopted the same model. Maya's story became part of children's textbooks, a lesson in empathy and bravery. Years went by. Jonathan grew older, his hair silvering, but his eyes still bright with warmth. Maya grew too, from a curious little girl into a confident young woman. She earned a scholarship through the Maya Project's education fund, and when asked what she wanted to study, she smiled and said, "Education. I want to be a teacher, like the kind who never lets a child feel invisible." Jonathan couldn't hold back his tears the day she told him. "You'll be amazing," he said, his voice trembling. "You already are." When she left for college, Jonathan gave her a simple letter. Inside, in neat handwriting, were the words, "You taught me that true wealth isn't found in what we keep, but in what we give. Love, Mr. Hayes." Years later, when Jonathan Hayes passed away peacefully in his sleep, the news broke across the world. But alongside his name and achievements, one headline stood out among all others. Billionaire's greatest legacy was a little girl's kindness. At his memorial, Maya, now grown, stood before a crowd of thousands. Her voice trembled, but her heart was steady. "Mr. Hayes gave me hope when I thought I didn't belong," she said softly. "He didn't just change my life. He showed me how powerful love can be, and I'll spend the rest of my life passing that love on." As the crowd stood in silence, she looked toward the sky and whispered, "Kindness always wins." And somewhere beyond the clouds, if hearts could smile, Jonathan Hayes was smiling too.